It's one of those things that when you hear it, you're like, oh no, this is obvious. This makes perfect sense. We should have known this all along. But it does take, I think nonprofits are guilty of this anyway. We have our causes and we silo because there's a sense of we're all competing for dollars for our mission.
Right.
I think our region does a really good job of collaborating and we work together well. And I think that's a product of how our community has come up as a geographically isolated area. So we've had to sort of have this kind of mutual assistance in life, in our mentality, in our way of life here. But, once you start looking at these things and you start seeing the overlap, you're like, oh yeah, no, that was obvious all along and we should have seen this. And the more that we focus on those intersections, I think the more effective we are as nonprofits, the more effective we are as communities. Because yeah, absolutely. Having a pet can, pull somebody back from the brink. It can be something, or it's a sense of stability. It's a sense of, it's the one thing for some people that is a constant in their lives every single day. So, in fact, one of the programs that we've started here at Roice-Hurst that I'm really proud of, and it's the first of its kind, period, like in the country at all, is we have a partnership with the homeless shelter, Homeward Bound. And we put in these individual, they're called pallet shelters, but they're not made out of pallets. They come in on a pallet, but they're these 8x8 private shelters with beds, heaters, air conditioning, lights, electricity, everything except for plumbing, essentially. And it's a dignified, safe place where people who have pets who are experiencing homelessness can shelter with their pets. Because it's such a barrier for getting into a homeless shelter. You can't bring your pets in. It's congregate shelter, it's safety, it's health, it's all of the reasons. And I completely understand that. But I also know that people make choices that are adverse to their health and safety in order to not separate with their pets. And that's something that's, it's both noble and also, again, pretty obvious. When you love that pet and that pet, you feel that I think almost duty to that pet, that obligation, because that you made a commitment to the pet. You'll make a decision to stay in a car or on the streets or by the river to not give that pet up. So by creating this, this alternative for them, there's a place that they can not only be safe and stay with their pet, but they can access services then that are provided through the homeless shelter and through our organization as well. And so it becomes a wraparound for, rather than a barrier to have those pets.
Welcome to the Koolers Lifestyle podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and I'm excited to have you join me as I interview community members and business leaders from the communities in which I live, work, and serve through my business Kooler Garage Doors. We're going to bring you highlights on characters in our communities. Why? Because community matters, and I want to know more about who is behind our business and leadership in order to understand and support the community fabric that our relationships make up. And collectively, we can build stronger communities that support our lifestyles, our youth, and our health. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Koolers Lifestyle podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn. Today, I get to sit down with Anna Stout. She's the CEO of the Roice-Hurst Humane Society and the current mayor of Grand Junction. And I've got to say, just in my little bit of research, Anna is a force in our community, and I'm so thankful to visit with you, Anna. Thanks for joining.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And I understand you're beaming in from your office at the Roice-Hurst Society?
That's right. Yeah, it's an offsite office because we've grown so much that we have actually outgrown our space. But I had to come in here because I was going to do it from home, and there were way too many animals that were, a potential disruption for any kind of recording.
I get that. Well, again, thank you for your time. I'm really excited. I know that our conversation can go in multiple different directions. And let's just build out a little bit of a context. Did you grow up in Grand Junction?
I did. So I wasn't born and raised here. I was born in Logan, Utah. And we came over, I think when I was about 3. My father got a job. He worked in newspapers, a thriving business in today's world. And he moved over here. He got a job at the Daily Sentinel. So he moved my twin sister, my mother, and I over to Grand Junction. And we've been here ever since. And, this is the only home that I know. I have one very, very sort of flashy memory from Logan, but otherwise Grand Junction is truly home.
I love it. What was it like growing up
in Grand Junction? Was there a lot of freedom? Was it a smaller town? What was it like?
Yeah, it's interesting because the Grand Junction I grew up in was one you planned to leave. And it wasn't, so there was a lot of sort of anticipation of getting out of here and preparation for getting out of here. It wasn't a cool place. There wasn't a whole lot to do. There definitely wasn't a lot to do for young people. So there was certainly freedom. I have a very happy childhood, in general, like my memories are very pleasant. It wasn't a dangerous or an unhappy place, but, you grow up knowing that if you are going to make it in the world, you don't do that in Grand Junction. And, it's part of the work that I do now in so many ways is making sure that Grand Junction is a place that you don't have to leave to be successful, removing the stigma of staying. So, it was I did a lot of just kind of walking. My friends and I lived down the road from each other. So we'd walk to each other's houses. Then our kind of main pastime was walking to the city market for some reason. So it was, I don't know, it was a relaxed childhood, very safe community, very trusting families in my world. So a pleasant childhood.
Yeah. I love that perspective. I think that's the first time I've heard somebody put it in those words of, as the town that you plan to leave. I think a lot of small towns kind of play that similar because I hear local folks up in Gunnison speak to the same thing. So that's an interesting perspective. Where did your journeys take you? I know you spent some time international, but as you grew up in Grand Junction, what were the next moves? Where was studying college for you? And
so
give us a little summary on the journey.
Yeah. So the plan was to leave. That was the idea. You don't, in my generation, you went off to college if you were a good student, and I was a very good student. So I started at the University of Portland, and I was on a presidential engineering scholarship. And after a semester, it was very evident I was not going to be an engineer because I was not very good at physics. And so I came back, and that was the interesting thing. After a semester, I came back here because I couldn't continue. It was way too expensive for me to keep studying without the scholarship. And if I wasn't going to be an engineer, I wasn't going to have an engineering scholarship. So I came back here really kind of with my head down and my tail tucked between my legs because, again, there was that stigma of being here. And so because I came back in between the first and second semester, there wasn't a whole lot of time to figure out what else to do. So I enrolled at Mesa just to not lose a couple of the small scholarships that I had and just to have time to figure it out and still, be getting credits. And I think in my mind, I would end up on the Front Range. I was, thinking DU or somewhere like that. But then after the semester here, and I didn't tell any friends that I was back. It wasn't something that I announced. It was just it was meant to be just kind of a placeholder until whatever came next. And after that first semester at Mesa, there was a course that was advertised in El Salvador, which I had no idea where that was or anything about it. And it was a sociology class, and I did not know what that was either. But I'd always wanted to study abroad and travel. So I asked my mom if she would support me in going to this little country that she also knew nothing about. And she basically pushed me out the door and said, go. And it wasn't a long time. It was like, I think 16 days or a couple weeks. And it was a very pivotal moment for me. The experience, it was the first time I'd left the country, the experience of staying in homes in this community that we didn't have electricity, didn't have running water, didn't have any of the amenities that you're used to in this country. But experiencing that generosity and that hospitality, it was the, sort of that cliche life-changing experience. And a couple of us came back, and most of us were from CMU, or at that time it was Mesa State, but most of us were students, and a couple were community members, and a couple of us just wanted to continue it somehow to like honor the experience. So we started working to establish a sister city. So we started by going to the Grand Junction City Council, which, spoiler alert, comes full circle later in my world, and asking for the city council to adopt this little community. We also, sort of made our way blindly through the process of starting a nonprofit. And what I didn't realize I was doing until probably after I graduated from Mesa was that I was putting down roots without realizing it. And, when you start a sister city, there's that city is kind of that's the link there. So you're putting down roots automatically by starting something like that. And the university was perfect for me. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gotten stuck there. But it was absolutely the environment I was looking for. It was the class size I was looking for. The professors were wonderful. So with this sort of tunnel vision focus on starting this nonprofit and building this relationship with this community in El Salvador, I stayed in Grand Junction, and without really realizing I had stayed until many years later that I was like, I'm still here. That wasn't the plan, but it also couldn't have been more perfect for the trajectory that my happy life, the life that I would have, if I didn't know that I was going to end up here, but still could describe what an amazing life would look like, it would look like this. So I was just really, kind of unintentional about being here. And that's what kept me in Grand Junction and back and forth to El Salvador, which of course ignited a love for travel, and that I did a lot of travel all around the world and continue to try to do that as often as I can.
What's the sister city?
So it's a little community called El Espino, and it's a very small rural community up in the volcanic mountains in El Salvador. And this year we celebrate 19 years of that relationship.
No kidding.
So
wow.
Pretty exciting. I don't know that we knew 19 years ago whether we would make it last and kind of be what shape it would take. But it's been, it's a really impactful organization that's primarily where we provide scholarships for students down in El Salvador, but we also take people down from mostly the Grand Valley, but all around the U.S. to experience that exchange, that exchange of ideas, of cultures, of friendships.
It's got to be gorgeous in that town.
It is. It's rough. It's a community. The country has been plagued by, conquest, corruption, poverty, crime for its entire modern history, and there is this was until just recently a really bad gang problem. Now it's an interesting transition from that very dangerous, unsafe, unpredictable, no opportunity kind of country to now, there's a leader that is implementing some very positive things, but also some very concerning things when you look at long-term and authoritarianism and stuff. So it'll be, I feel like that we have a front row seat here as an organization working down there to this transition from kind of a not solid democracy to potentially a dictatorship. So it's fascinating. It's gorgeous, though. It's very tropical and very colorful.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'm going to bounce around a little bit because my next question kind of goes into future, but I'm curious, and I'm curious. Do you know, like, the legacy that you're building towards? Do you know what you want to kind of build and leave behind as Anna moves through the life journey? And are you on a mission?
It's really interesting. Here with my team at Roice-Hurst, we do an exercise where we identify our core values, our sort of non-negotiables. And we use that to discuss, when there are conflicts, it's typically not personal. It's more of a values clash, and you can talk through those. But the interesting thing is that in my non-negotiables, my top 5, legacy is my top value. That's the thing that drives me the most. And I'm not sure that I know how to really define what it looks like, simply that there has to be something that lasts beyond me, that makes things better to sort of justify my existence here. And that's something that I've felt that since I was young, this need to be purposeful and this need to be impactful. And, I've thought about what that looks like. And, a part of it is just that I hope that things are better. And that sounds a little contrived, but I hope that my work in all of the areas that I work in alleviates suffering and makes it easier to have a good, fulfilling life in El Salvador, in Grand Junction, in Colorado, in wherever. So I don't know that I can completely articulate what is meaningful about, what would be a meaningful legacy. Simply that somebody's life and hopefully many lives are better because of the work I was able to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that sense from you. And you mentioned that it was always there from an early age. Was that cultivated by family? Is this just part of your core and kind of what you came to the world with?
I don't know. I mean, I don't remember ever having conversations, with my parents or whatever as a kid about you need to go make a difference or you have to make an impact on the world. Those weren't conversations we really had. I do remember a moment in my world that I knew exactly. I had such clarity of what I wanted to do with my life. I ultimately lost sight of that and I didn't follow that path. But I remember in 6th grade, in Mrs. Darian's class, we watched CNN for Kids every morning. And that was, she recorded it at like 4 a.m. and we watched it every single day. And I remember watching one of the reporters standing in this sort of flooded field reporting internationally. And I knew right then that I wanted to be an international journalist. And I wanted to sort of tell the stories and expose what was happening around the world and bring that to the rest of the world. And that was something that, like I said, it was just this real moment of clarity. I knew that that's what I wanted to be. And ultimately, I knew that I wanted to be a war correspondent. And had I sort of followed the path that my heart wanted, that my sort of purpose felt like it was kind of pointing towards, that's where I would have gone. But then I had so many influential adults in my life in high school because I was good at math and science who said, you're good at math and science, we need women in STEM. And it was almost this sense of duty or obligation to go down that path. And then again, like I said, I wasn't especially intentional when I left University of Portland and decided not to be an engineer. So I think had I taken a beat and just really reflected, I may have found my way back to that original sort of dream. But everything that I've been able to do has kind of fit into that. I'm not a war correspondent, but I've been working in a country that has effectively been at war the entire time I've been going down there, and I've gotten to work on things that do bring awareness and innovative ways of thinking about how to solve challenges in our community, in animal welfare, in translation and interpreting and language access in general. So, I think that I've managed to make it all fit. But that was that. I don't know who it came from, but I do remember that moment knowing what I wanted to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. You work with the Roice-Hurst Humane Society. Can you give me a little bit of context of what animal welfare, what does this really mean? And not maybe, I want to know what it means for animals, but also at the community at large. Like, how does this create the ripples?
I think it's a really interesting conversation we're just starting to have over the last maybe 5 years in animal welfare. I think that when I joined almost 8 years ago, when I joined the industry, there was still very much this idea of, bring us all your animals. We are the best at taking care of them, and we do this better than anyone else. So, it was kind of like, bring us all your animals. And I remember in the very first couple of months that I was there feeling really uncomfortable with how we treated people and how we talked about people and how, the team at the shelter at the time was very judgmental of people who came in and why they came in and what condition animals were in. And I think it was really easy to lose sight of the fact that you can love and care for animals and the welfare of animals is very important, but it is so connected to humans. And if you don't solve, we're watching animals be surrendered for multiple reasons, but really when you kind of backed out, you could see that the root most of the time was that animals were coming in for people problems, not animal problems. And so we shifted at our organization, and within, I think, 2 years, hired a human social worker to to be on our staff to try to help work through human problems to keep animals in the homes that they were in, or to, to kind of figure out how people were our allies in this mission to take care of animals and to find animals homes and to keep them from suffering and abuse. So that now is a shift that we're seeing through the whole industry, a focus. And in many ways, I think the pandemic accelerated this because we couldn't just, you just couldn't warehouse animals because you couldn't have a bunch of people in congregating in buildings, taking care of them and walking them and adopting them and everything else. So there was a shift, and we were, I think, at the forefront of that as an organization here on the Western Slope, for kind of national leadership in it. But really the idea is, I think we're trying to take it one step farther. It's not just that people are part of the mission of animal welfare, but that animals and pet ownership and pet companionship actually contributes to human health. So we have a healthier community when we have a community that can have pets, when we have a community that's supported in keeping its pets, because every animal that we adopt out, I used to joke in the early days, and then it kind of was like, oh, this isn't a joke. We were like, oh, every single animal that walks out of here, we're sending somebody out with better mental health, better companionship, fewer feelings of isolation, all of that. And then we were kind of joking like, oh, we've got 75 furry therapists in our building at any time. And then really started that went from kind of like I said, kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of describing what we do to a realization that animal welfare is a component, a pillar of community health. And so we're working now really sort of intentionally on spreading that and partnering with human health agencies and really trying to regularly connect that link, that the more people in this community that have pets and have pets that are well and not suffering and can keep their pets, the more that works on trauma, the more that works on connection and just elevating overall community health.
That's amazing. Wow. What I love about that, there's so much I love about this. Animal health, basically what I've heard is animal health is human health. And they go together.
Yep.
And there's a lot of parallels and similarities. I can see this. So we adopted a beautiful spirit in a dog just a handful of years ago. And in part of it was a motivation of my wife for supporting the human health of my children.
Yep.
And there's certainly a lot of responsibility and a skill set that can come along with caring for another being and an animal. My dad's in town visiting, and my kids are a little bit older, so they get some teenage years, and he's an older gentleman, and he's bonded with my dog because they're hanging out and they get out together. Well, so there's this human health component, and it's so beautiful. The other little piece here is when I was working in drug prevention for the county, I recognized that it wasn't a drug problem, it was life. And there's always the underlying component, and there's many factors in that of the environment, of mental health and components. But what I'm hearing in this work is it's another layer of building health within the community. And when you put it in that context, I'm kind of blown away. It's awesome.
It's one of those things that when you hear it, you're like, oh no, this is obvious. This makes perfect sense. We should have known this all along. But it does take, I think nonprofits are guilty of this anyway. We have our causes and we silo because there's a sense of we're all competing for dollars for our mission.
Right.
I think our region does a really good job of collaborating, and we work together well. And I think that's a product of how our community has come up as a geographically isolated area. So we've had to sort of have this kind of mutual assistance in life, in our mentality, in our way of life here. But once you start looking at these things and you start seeing the overlap, you're like, oh yeah, no, that was obvious all along, and we should have seen this. And the more that we focus on those intersections, I think the more effective we are as nonprofits, the more effective we are as communities. Because yeah, absolutely, having a pet can, pull somebody back from the brink. It can be something, or it's just it's a sense of stability. It's a sense of, it's the one thing for some people that is a constant in their lives every single day. So In fact,
Yeah.
one of the programs that we've started here at Roice-Hurst that I'm really proud of, and it's the first of its kind, period, like in the country at all, is we have a partnership with the homeless shelter, Homeward Bound. And we put in these individual, they're called pallet shelters, but they're not made out of pallets. They come in on a pallet, but they're these 8x8 private shelters with beds, heaters, air conditioning, lights, electricity, everything except for plumbing, essentially. And it's a dignified, safe place where people who have pets who are experiencing homelessness can shelter with their pets, because it's such a barrier for getting into a homeless shelter. You can't bring your pets in. It's congregate shelter, it's safety, it's health, it's all of the reasons. And I completely understand that. But I also know that people make choices that are adverse to their health and safety in order to not separate with their pets. And that's something that's it's both noble and also, again, pretty obvious. When you love that pet and that pet, you feel that I think almost duty to that pet, that obligation, because that you made a commitment to the pet. You'll make a decision to stay in a car or on the streets or by the river to not give that pet up. So by creating this, this alternative for them, there's a place that they can not only be safe and stay with their pet, but they can access services then that are provided through the homeless shelter and through our organization as well. And so it just becomes a wraparound for, rather than a barrier to have those pets.
Hey everybody, this is Luke from Kooler Garage Doors. Just want to take a quick second to talk about our sponsor, Sommar Garage Door Openers. In our opinion, Sommars are the highest quality product on the market today. We recommend them for all of our residential garage door installs because of the variety of features they include, such as Wi-Fi connectivity and safety features such as a fixed chain, which moves along a secure rail to ensure your garage door opens quietly and safely. Click on the link in the description to learn more about Sommar Garage Door Openers.
Touching hearts. What's the scale of Roice-Hurst? What are your measurables? Like how many individuals or pets or lives are we touching?
Yeah, so we actually do measure a lot. We're a data-driven organization. And last year we served just shy of 2,500 unique individuals, and that's individuals with pets in some way. And that's not just our adoptions and people who are bringing pets in, or people whose dogs are stray dogs in Delta and then they come and reclaim them. But it's also people who are coming into our vaccine clinics or doing our joint human animal health clinics, where if you come and get a human health service, you get your animal vaccines for free or for a really, really steep discount, so that we're using pets to motivate people to take care of their own health. Because research has shown that people are more likely to do a better job caring for their pets than themselves, administering daily medication and stuff like that. So with all of those programs, about 2,500 unique individuals, but it's also, we measure impact much more broadly than that, because we look at it as, how much we're doing. We host events where people come together. We have one event called Woofstock, which is a dog-friendly concert where you can go to the amphitheater at Las Colonias and have your pets there and, be with your dog, be with others. So it goes for us so much further than just the animals and the people who walk through our doors or to our clinics, but also then who comes together in that sense of community around love for pets and pet ownership. And then even more broadly, how are we then impacting in our programming, in our leadership? How do we impact other animal welfare organizations, and how animal welfare is done, so that it's not just our community that's thinking about pets and community health, but it's all of us as an industry.
Yeah. And you're speaking industry like nationally.
Yeah. Our conferences are actually pretty continental, if you will, because Canada and the US are really connected in our animal welfare efforts. And so we want to make sure that this is broad. We also work at the state level on legislative efforts and making sure that there are good laws in place for how animal welfare operates as well.
Amazing. And in our pre-convo before we hit record, you had mentioned that this work that you do with animal welfare is closely tied into the work that you do in policy and in leading the city. And so with your role as mayor, can you speak into that? Like, where are the similarities and what are some of the pieces that you're excited about and working towards as the city leadership team?
It's interesting because I think a lot of people think that if you're a good, successful business owner, you would likely be a good council member, right? We tout that, you see that in campaigns, I actually think that running a nonprofit is much more akin to running a city or a municipality or a county than running a business, because we're accountable in much more similar ways. So there are donors that I'm accountable to at my nonprofits, taxpayers I'm accountable to at the city. And also you run a lean, efficient organization when you're spending other people's money. And when you're dependent upon that trust in how you do those things. And that's something you don't have to have that transparency or that accountability in business. So, coming from that animal welfare world and knowing too that you're not competing, what we talked about before, that it's not competition. The more that you bring people, organizations, agencies, thought partners together and try to work, you identify problems that are impacting all of us, and then you work to try to find solutions that involve all of us. And I think that that's something that is absolutely an overlap from my work in the nonprofit world and my work on the council. And it's been really interesting too, because it's just it's a collaborative world in nonprofits. And your donors, you're not just asking like-minded donors for support. You need the support of the community. You need the support of donors who have one element of what you do that really speaks to them and that they feel invested in. And that's really similar with how you run a city. You don't run a city just for the people who voted for you or for the people who support you and think you're great. You are running the city for the entire community, as well as the people who are visiting the community who are not voters or constituents, but are coming to the community and spending tax dollars in our hotels and on our sales, our retail and everything. So there's a lot of parallel for me between city government and nonprofit work.
Yeah. I can only imagine, and I've seen this in 20 years of just living on the Western Slope, there's significant change going on. I think it's exacerbated since the pandemic and a shift in people's desires to live in certain populated areas. And I think the Western Slope has been found. So from your perspective, in growing up in a specific Grand Junction to today's Grand Junction and taking on leadership, what do you see as some of the more significant changes, and what are we excited for?
I think, so what started before me was this real focus on diversifying our economy so that we were not dependent on one industry and we were no longer susceptible to that boom and bust. That was something that really impacted the Grand Junction that I grew up in, because there wasn't a sense of permanency. It was almost like you were always just kind of waiting for the next big crisis. Where I see a lot of change happening currently is that this has traditionally been a community that's really resistant to growth. And I don't mean growth just in the city sprawling out and building new homes, but general growth, what kinds of amenities we offer and what we expect out of our community. Are we a community that were once a rec center? Are we a community that invests in public-private partnerships to create things like our riverfront development? Are we a community that sees the benefit of marketing our community and bringing people here to enjoy it? So I think that that's part of what's shifting, is that Grand Junction we're really proud of what we have, and we see potential for being, kind of the next version of ourselves as a community, and we're supporting that. And that's something that has been really resisted for a lot of the time I've been in Grand Junction, which is over 30 years. And I don't think it's happening too rapidly. I don't think that we're growing too rapidly. I think what we're doing now, and this is to the credit of city leadership for the last, 6 to 8 years or so, is being incredibly intentional about how we grow. How do we grow smartly? What kind of community do we want to be? What are the priorities for our community? And also not just us as leadership, but how are we engaging the community to find out what community the members of the community envision for ourselves? So that's where I think that we've really come a long way. And we're seeing this place turn into, again, a place that you don't flee when you're a good student and you get done with school. You don't leave to go find a good life. You have that here. And, you know, it's an honor to get to grow up here because you're surrounded by this amazing natural beauty, and you're in a community that's connected to each other and that has things to do, and that you can actually, build a life here, whether that's starting a business or working for somewhere, and really have success here in a place that you can thrive. And you don't have the anonymity of a big city, but it's also just big enough that it's not a bunch of busybodies who know everything that's happening with everybody. It's like this kind of perfect fit. And I think our community sees that, and long timers like myself see that, and we value that. But it's also bringing people into town who want this kind of lifestyle as well.
Yeah. One of my final questions was to go full circle, and you kind of addressed it, but for the young people that are growing up in town today, has that perspective changed? I mean, do you have interaction, or I'm just wondering, are we still growing up to flee, or is there that reality of like, no, there's real opportunity here. And not only that, like, this is an intentional community. We know that, and there's a ton of resources, and it's just a beautiful location. But yeah, that was going to be my question. Are the young people still growing up to flee, or
I think
is that really shifting?
I actually think it's shifting. And in fact, just if
awesome.
This isn't evidence of it, on Monday, I get to go to Grand Junction High School for Decision Day, where students who are graduating from Grand Junction, it's a big thing. We did not have a Mesa Decision Day in 2003 when I graduated from Junction. That was not something that I recall having. It's not something I recall anybody being really excited about staying. And I get to go be part of this, just kind of as a spectator, this exciting day where students from our valley are choosing to stay. And I think that's incredible. And, I really am. I try really hard to make sure that my term on council is that I am engaging with young people and with the community in general. But I know when I was 19 and I stood in front of the city council to ask for this sister city to be adopted, it was terrifying. I had no idea who they were. It was just sort of this like, this kind of like ephemeral idea of like, they're just decision makers, and they just make decisions and you live with them. And I want to make sure that young people know that we as decision makers are community members, and we are accessible, and we you can and should know us and recognize our faces and be confident that you can come to us with questions or issues and have those addressed. And I think about it a lot. When I started on council, the day that I was sworn in, I was the youngest person on council by 25 years. So I was 34 and the next youngest person was 59. And
amazing.
And so it was really important to me to kind of like, I joked with somebody, we were talking about, it's kind of like the Kool-Aid man who which is a reference that none of the young people would even get, but Kool-Aid man that like bursts through the wall and leaves a hole that others can follow through.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of the time when somebody, either young people or women or minorities or, diverse groups of people, when you finally succeed, it's like you climb the ladder and then you kick it down so that others can't come back because they should work as hard as you did. And what I'm trying to do is not only affix the ladder to the wall, but also figure out, can we build a ramp? Can we make this easier for young people to see, and for women to see what it's like and how to get there? It's great because our incoming council in just a week now has 3 people in their 30s of our 7, and then 5 under 50 of our 7. And that's very different from the demographics of the last couple decades, I would say. Unfortunately, we just had 2 years with only 1 woman on council, and we'll have 2 more years with just myself. And that I feel like is a little bit of a step backwards, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And, young people, it's funny because I'm just entering that period where I'm not really young people anymore. And sort of the age that makes sense to be sort of taking the reins and leading the community. But young people really need to be part of that vision and engaged, because we have 18-year-olds who were not, or 17-year-olds or 16-year-olds in high schools who were not engaging when we're making these 10-year plans. And in 10 years, they will have families and businesses and careers. So yeah, I think that kind of full circle piece of making sure that we're engaging that demographic of our community and making sure that they feel like they have a place here, that they don't have to leave and come back when they're 30 or 40, but that they can actually be leaders in it starting upon graduation and even earlier.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And for the listeners that want to reach out, whether they want to get involved at the city or get involved with the animal welfare, how can people find you?
A quick Google search will give you a bunch of different emails. For anything related to the city, they can email me at annas@gjcity.org. And I should mention too, we don't have, the city council is essentially a part-time or kind of basically just above a volunteer role. We don't have a staff or a team that's, we don't have aides that are monitoring our email or anything. When you email us, you email directly to us and we respond. For anything related to the animal shelter or anything else, they can email me at anna@rhumanesociety.org or calling the shelter 970-434-7337.
Beautiful. We'll include those into our show notes, Anna. And I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate your passion, your fire for life, for the legacy that you're building. And it's certainly inspiring. And so, yeah, thank you again for your time.
Thank you
for opening up. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. Thank you very much.
We will talk to you very soon.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to the Koolers Lifestyle podcast. We count on your subscriptions, your likes, your shares, and I encourage you to do that now. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, lower right-hand button. If you're on audio, download this, share it, and we look forward to having you on the next one.